Einen nimdodin ima. They are not counted. So let's say that there are both some cracks in the soil deep and some boulders in the soil, and you measure the area occupied by the cracks and the boulders, and it comes out to 100 amas, square amas. So when you turn over the field to the buyer, you'd have to, what did I say? It's 100. You'd have to give him 75,100 amas so that he has the 75,000 square amas of arable land. You exclude the impediments to plowing, okay? And you have to substitute more land for, because you said, I'm selling you a kur. Okay, but if their cracks are less than 35 inches, 40 inches deep, okay, pachas mikan, or the hills are higher, the boulders are higher, nimdadinim, then they are calculated into the 75,000, because less than 10, there is a halacha that four tvachim by 4 tvachim, which is about 15 inches by 15 inches, that's 10 high or 10 deep, is called a makom bifnei atzma. So it's not included. But if it's less than that, then it's not a makom bifnei atzma, and it is included. Now, that's one. Okay, now two. I'm going to say just a tiny bit different. Im omer lo kebeskur offer. If I say to you, I'm selling you about an acre of land, actually a base score 75,000 square amas, and he uses the word the ka, so that makes it like or about. Afilu hu yisham na'akim amukim Yaiser me'asara tvachim, o solayim, gavayim, Yaiser me'asara tvachim. Now, if there are boulders or ditches, they are included because you did not commit to an exact amount. You committed be'erech a kur, sort of a kur. So now they are included. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to discuss the implications of that Mishnah. And we're going to talk about, the first thing we're going to talk about, if you donate family property, in other words, it's the land you inherited from your father going all the way back to Yehoshua, and you give it to the Beis HaMikdash, you have the right to redeem it up to Yovel year. If you do not redeem it, you lose it, and it goes to the Kahanim. Okay, so over time, the Kahanim collect lots of land. Mel, don't sleep through this one. I'm not. This is your collection. But the Torah doesn't want that to happen. They want your descendants to get the land. So there's a special redemption of 50 silver shkolim, Torah shkolim, per chomer of land. Now, chomer is the exact same word as base kur, 75,000 square amas, except that the word chomer is used in the Torah for how much the redemption is, so we're using the word chomer over here. Okay? So how about these rocks? What happens with them with regard to the redemption process? That's what we're going to talk about. Tanachasam, we learn in a Mishnah, Hamakdish Sedehu Be'es Chayovel, when you gave money or gave a land to the temple in the Tekufa, in the time frame where Yovel was actually celebrated, Lebeis Zerach Chaimer Sa'arim, and you want to redeem it, you give an area of a chomer. That's the exact same area that our Mishnah talked about, just a different word. Kamishim shekel kesef, 50 silver shkolim. Okay, that's a flat piece of land. But what if their terrain is ditchy or rocky, right? Hoyusham nekoyim amukim yud tvachim. If it has cracks in the soil, ditches, whatever, deeper, maybe it's an arroyo, a dried up riverbed, less, that is exactly 10 or more than 10, or boulders higher than 10, okay, and nimdadin ima, they do not get counted in the measurement. So the same halacha as our Mishnah, pachas mikan, but if the holes are not 10 or the boulders are 9.99 high, then nimdadin ima, they do get measured. They're included. Okay? V'amai, why can't you count them as given to the temple? Liktishu ba'anpe nafshayu. Why can't we say that they're a separate piece, that it is land, and you did inherit it? So why don't we say that's a different, all right, it's a makom b'fnei atzma. So it's a different piece of land, but you're giving that to the temple together with the other piece. And then you measure that little thing and you do the math. What fraction of 50 shkalim would you pay for that? Okay. So in other words, a rocky field, you give the value of the whole field because it's slightly larger than 75,000 amas. So you do the full 50, and then you measure the rocks and the crevices, and it comes out, 2 prutas or whatever it is to redeem them. Does everybody understand what I've said? Nobody understood what I said?
Yeah, you give the
okay.
Plush.
So the answer to that is, if you want to answer, Kaven do lo have a base kur lo kodshi. Since they don't add up to a base kur by themselves, you can't consecrate them because you have to give land that you're going to pay 50 shkalim back for. Okay? But there's a brisa, Hatanya, there's a brisa that says soida. So the word soida, if you open a chumash and you look at the pasuk, if you donate it the field, where the word the field is a riboy, it doesn't have to be there. If you don't, if you have ancestral field and you donate it to the temple, that's understandable. So why does it say if you have an ancestral field and you donate it, the field, to the temple, why does it have that extra word field? So the Gemara says a brisa that teaches us Saida, Ma Talmud Lomer, what does it have that extra word for? Lefisha Nemar, in order to teach us Zera Chaimer Sa'irim, B'chamishim Shekel Kesef. A chomer of barley can be put on that land, that's 75,000 square amas. Ainli ella shahektish ba'inan hazeh. If that is all the pasuk said, I would infer that I cannot give less land than that to the temple. Okay? Menayin l'rabos lesech v'chatzi lesech. How do I know that I can give a significantly smaller piece of land, and then I take out my pocket calculator, or I go to somebody like Bob who knows how to do math, and you could, if it's, let's see, if 75,000 is 50 shkolim, Then 7,500 would be 10 shkolim. No, 5 shkolim. Thank you, Bob. So why can't I do that? Say a tarkiv, a chatzi tarkiv, even a tarkiv or a chatzi tarkiv, which is very small. So Talmud Lomer, the teacher puts that Talmud puts that extra word in soda mikol makom.
What's the target?
What?
How much is the target?
I have no idea. Footnote 7. A lesech is 15 saw or half a core. A tarkef is half a saw or 3 kav.
Got it.
The word tarkev, the footnote, this is cute, is tar, tre, kav. 3 kavin. All right? So thank you for asking. So Talmud Lomer, soda mikol makom. So the extra word soda means you can donate whatever you want. So now theoretically, you could donate this little hole, measure the area of it, and pay a half a pay a pruta or whatever it's worth doing the math. And Bob is here so he can handle the math for us. So the Gemara says that's not it. Rav Ukva Bar Chana says, Benakaim Maleim Mayim Askinan. We're talking about a crevice in the earth that's full of water. So it's clearly not farmable. Okay, you can't plow water and plant seeds in water. That can't be planted. So Dekanami, we can go back and look at the Mishnah. And by analyzing the wording of the Mishnah, we can demonstrate that we're talking about a hole that cannot be plowed. Now, theoretically, I can climb into a crevice and sprinkle seed. So it can be planted. But if it's full of water, it can't be planted. So how are we going to learn in the Mishnah that it has to be a situation where it can't be planted because of the circumstance, i.e., full of water? Okay? Tekatani dumya disaloya. When the Mishnah talked, it said cracks or boulders. Now, since you cannot plant seed and the cracks are made analogous to the boulders, so since you can't sprinkle seeds on a rock and expect them to grow, similarly, it's impossible to plant in the crack. And that's Mamina, that's the proof. So now the Gemara has a problem with that. If that's the case, afilu pachas mikanami. What's with the 10? If you have 9 tvachim hole full of water, it's just as unplantable as 10. Okay? So that's the issue. Or rocks less than 10 high. You can't plant on them. What? That's the, okay. So hainu negone da'ara mikro. Those small cracks are not, I explain it, they're not a makom bifnei atzmo. The Gemara is saying that in a different word. Those cracks are part of the land. The word land applies to them, okay, because they're part of the actual field. Sade da'ara mikru, it's called the bones of the spinal bones of the land. Those are the rocks because they're not a makom bifnei atzmo. Okay, the vertebrae of the land. Hachinami. So when the Mishnah gave these rules, well, that's hachimai. What's the halacha over there? What the 10 business? Okay, what are we talking? What if I have a piece of land and I'm selling it to Bob, and it has a canyon in it, a narrow, a cleft in the soil, but it's not full of water. Since we analogize to a rock, maybe that's different, right? Omer Rav Papa, Afal Pisha, Ein Malayim Mayim, even though it's not full of water, it doesn't get counted anyway. My timer, why not? Ein Adam Reitze Sheyitain Meyoisa V'Makam Echad. A person does not want to give land, pay for a contiguous chunk of land and wind up if I have this buy this 75,000 square chunk of land and there's a channel running through it from left to right, so effectively I'm not getting a contiguous field. I'm getting two smaller fields.
They have there. They have these wadis, or
That's what we're talking about.
Ditches, and you can fill them in. They'll open up again.
That's not the issue, because no, you can't fill them in because they're seasonal, and water will run through and wash it away. So therefore, we have to. If there's that impediment to me easily farming, remember this. I didn't have a big combine. I got a dude pull it with a donkey or a bull, and it becomes much more difficult to plow and then go across the wadi and go plow again. So if I think I'm paying for contiguous land and you deliver segmented land, I'm not so thrilled with that. That's the reply he gives. So Ravina doesn't like that. Maskifle, Ravina challenges that. Ha dumya desalayim katani. Are we talking about dry clefts? In other words, you can't even raise that issue. We already said we're talking about water-filled holes or clefts. So all of a sudden you're throwing in dry clefts? That's a whole different discussion. That's not in our Mishnah. Okay? Masalayim dalav b'nei zeriyahu ninahu, just as you cannot possibly plant on the top of a great big boulder, af haninami, with the clefts that the Mishnah is referring to, dalav b'nei zeriyahu ninahu, cannot under any circumstances be planted, and therefore the most comfortable way to explain that is saying it's full of water. So maybe there is some understanding that a shallow crack, an unwatered crack, you could work around or fill in. That may be true, but that's not what the Mishnah is talking about. Okay, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to fill it in, then you have to plane the field.
Whatever you have to do with that. Maybe you can renegotiate the price. We don't know. But that's not what we're dealing with in this Mishnah.
Yeah.
That's a separate issue. Okay. Now, what about saying that, all right, so let's go weiter. Kikatani dumya dislayim, when the Mishnah makes a perfect analogy between the cracks and the boulders of pachos mikan, does it include less than 10 tvachim cracks? If they're full of water, we asked, what about 9? What about 6? If it's full of water, it's full of water. But the Mishnah leaves, but it still has to be 10. Because 10 is a makam bifnei atzmo. All right. Pachas mikan, less than that, nimdanin ima does get included in the field because it's not makam bifnei atzmo. Okay. Torshim now Amar Rav Yitzchak, Torashim sha'amru, these boulders that we're talking about in the field, okay? Base arba kavin. Okay. When I buy a farm from you, I'm expecting what? I'm expecting soil that's flat enough and clear enough that I can hook my bull to a plow and I can farm on it. If there are lots of boulders, even if you exclude them and you may give me another 16,000 amas somewhere else, it doesn't, it really impedes my use of it. So the Gemara is saying the outside limit of how much rakia you have to accept is an area where the rocks themselves do not total more than 4 kav. Okay? If it's more than that, then it's a mekachtos, and I can undo the transaction. Amarav Ukba Bar Chama Vohu Shemuvla in Bechameshes Kavin. And this 4 kav no good transaction rule it applies only if the 4 kav are close enough together that they plus the spaces between them add up to 5 kav. Okay? If they're concentrated in an area, then you can, in other words, if they're spread out enough that the spaces between them are a full kav, that means my plowing is sufficiently impeded that I can say it's a makatos. But if all the boulders are clustered together tightly in one area, so the 4 kav of boulder tops is in a space of 4.2 kavin, then I just give you 4.2 kavin more on the edge somewhere, and the seller meets his obligation.
But he didn't inspect the land before you signed the contract.
Yeah, he did. He wants the land, but now how are we going to write the contract? Are you going to sell me 74,996 kavin? Or are you going to sell me 75,000 amas, and you're going to make up the difference with a little extra strip somewhere?
Plus, me make a cost is after the fact.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it should be done before the fact, before you finish the deal.
I took your word for it. You said, oh, there's just a few rocks. When we looked at it, we're standing on a hilltop, we're looking down at the land. And I say that cluster of rocks over there could be a problem. And you say, no, I measured it, and I'll give you the extra land.
How way I am sure.
No, that's wrong. The Gemara is saying that when I go and I take possession and I find that the rocks are impeding my use of the land, I can say to you, give me my money back. That's what we're talking about. Okay? Now, Rav Chia Barava Omer Rav Yochanan, he tells us, Ho shemuv lo in beruba shel sodeh. He has a different opinion. He does not say, measure the tightness of the cluster of rocks. He says, look at the distribution of the rocks. If there's a tight cluster of rocks, even if it's 7 kavin, I can give you 7 kavin and you can plow around it. You know when you got a problem? When there's a boulder here and a boulder here and a boulder there. So you're zipping along with your plow and you bust your blade because of the distribution of the boulders. So he has an argument. Okay? So, boy, Rav Chia Barava, so he asks a question. Reuben b'ma'uta u'ma'utin beruba. If the majority of the rocks are within less than the majority of the field, in other words, they may be distributed, but they're more or less concentrated in one area. Right? what is that different than if the boulders are equally distributed all through the field and you can't use any of it? So the Gemara says, you know what? I don't know. Teku. Okay. So next question. Boy, Rebbe Yirmi, we're going to have a bunch of tekus here. We're not going to be happy campers. Okay. Now, Kisher Mahu. What if the boulders, there are a whole bunch of big boulders, it looks like Stonehenge. The boulders are in a circle. So theoretically, you can go in between the boulders and plow the inside, and then go out and plow the outside, right? So is that an impediment to the purchase? Okay. Or Kishiura Mahu. If the whole bunch of boulders are, every 3 amas or 5 amas across the whole field, like it was a mountain peak that once jutted up, and you have the tips like the Hawaiian Islands, something like that. Okay. Or it's Tadinan Mahu. What if the boulders are like the top of a Y? So they're saying like the horns of a goat. You're coming out of his head on an angle. What's the story? Okay. Or Derech Sha'alosan Mahu. What if the boulders are shaped in a zigzag pattern? Okay. Teku. We have no idea. Now, theoretically, the Bezdin will make a determination if you sell me a land with a circle of rocks in it. But the Gemara is unable to come to a conclusion. Now, moving on. Tana, we have a brisa. If you have a rock. Now, this is an interesting case, okay? There's this humongous boulder, but it's right on the edge of the property, okay? Afilu kol shahu. Even if, let's say, the boulder is on the next guy's property, and 1 inch of the boulder protrudes into the for sale property. Do you say ignore it? No, you don't say ignore it. Ein nimdad ima. You have to subtract it and give me another inch somewhere else, okay? Vim hayasomach lemeitzar. What if it's nearby? It's not actually intruding on this piece of property, but it's a little bit far away. Now, we'll discuss what that means. Ein nimdad ima, then it's not measured with the field. Okay, and that little bit is lavud. 3 tvachim is considered touching, even if there's a gap of 3 tvachim. So that's what's talking about here. Boy Rav Papa, mofsak afar bintayim. What if there's 3? You have a strip of land from your border, 3 tvachim, and then this boulder. Okay, mahu. Is that boulder considered touching the border and excluded, or is it included? Right? Teku. We don't know. What?
Teku.
Yeah, we're doing lots of tekus. Okay, now, boy Ravashi, another question. Afar milamata soinama lamaila. What if there's this boulder is sitting on the surface of the ground, and by its weight, it compresses the soil a couple of inches. So the boulder is free. It's not buried. It's free on the property. It could be theoretically rolled away. Or, Afer Lamala, what if the boulder is buried? Now, if it's buried deep enough that you can push your plow over it, it's not a problem. But what if it's completely buried? The seller can argue, what are you talking about? You have clear soil. There's no boulder there. But when you put a plow there, the blade of the plow cannot move past because of the top of the boulder. Okay, what is that story? Mahu, what's the halacha? Keku.
You don't know if the owner knew it was there or it just showed up later.
And that's irrelevant.
Like visual.
That's irrelevant. If I can't plow, then the land is not suitable for my purchase purpose. I mean, the buyer is supposed to be aware of the seller is supposed to be aware and has to disclose. It's like if you in Florida, there's a law. If there's ever been a flood affected your property, you must disclose it to the buyer, even if it was 25 years ago. And if you don't, he can sue you. All right, weiter, new Mishnah. Okay, now we talked about gets inclusions, don't have inclusions, but how do you do the measuring? Okay, so the way they did the measuring was with a rope with markings on it, like a tape measure. Think of a tape measure. Okay, base kur offer ani moichelach. I am selling you a base kur of earth, mida bechevel, measured with a measuring tape. Okay, opichas kolshahu. But then later on, I'm adding this, but to explain it, later on, you hire a surveyor and he measures it, and it's a little bit short. I mean, or we learned once earlier that summertime and wintertime, the same measuring rope will come out with different numbers because the rope swells in where it's moist and it shrinks a little bit where the air is very dry. So there can be this dispute about the measuring implement, okay? Or pichas kolshu, it's a little bit short. Yenake. He has to cut the price, the mathematical difference. So if I paid $1 million for 75,000 square amas, and it turns out to be 74,998, Bob will tell me he has to give me back $68.91. Right. All of that is made up. Okay, but he does have to give back. Okay, now, what about the new measure? And the new measure turns out you got 76,000 amas. You, the buyer, have to return to the seller. No, I'm not saying what intentionally. Okay, maybe you have to give back land, maybe you have to give back money. Okay. Yoiser kolshahu, if it's a little bit too much, yachser, he has to return. The im aimer pichas reiva lisla. We have, even if he gave him a quarter kav per se, less than a base kur. Remember, we measure the volume of an area of land by how much produce it'll yield when seeded. So that's why they use seed volume measures here. Okay. Oh, Hosir Ruva Lasla, he gives a quarter kav per se too much. And when he turns the title over to the buyer, he giyu, the buyer owns it. Okay. And there's no makeup. Yaiser cheshbon, but the buyer has to figure out, the buyer keeps it, but he has to figure out the cash value of the extra territory and give that to the seller. Mahu machsirlo. So what does he give back? Most money. Okay. So we're going to ask now the imroitze. But if the seller would rather keep the money and give back the piece of land, Machsilo karka, I can give back the piece of land. Okay, so lama omer machsilomos. Why does the Mishnah specify that the buyer can give back money? Okay, lepayos kaicho shel moicher, to tell you the strength of the seller's position. Because let's think about this. If I have 75,000 square amas of land, but it turns out to be 76. So I should pay you for the extra land. What good is it to you to have a 45-foot long, 3-inch wide strip of land out in the middle of a plain somewhere? So it's ridiculous to give you back a small piece of land. I have to give you cash value for it. That's what the Mishnah is telling us, that you have the upper hand there. You can say, give me the land because I own next door land, or give me the cash because I don't want this little pathway of land in the middle of the plain somewhere. Okay? So now, what happened, or beginner, or if it's a small purchase plot to begin with, because it's just a vegetable garden, base chatzi kav, the extra space is a half a kav. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, base rova. Rabbi Akiva says, nah, even a quarter of a kav. Maxilo es a karka. Even there, said Rabbi Akiva, because you're talking about my gardens near your garden, the land is of value to you, so I can give you back the land. Okay? And you can't make me give you money. Now, Roiva bilvad hu machzir, but it's now. We learned this earlier. Remember when we learned about buying or selling grain? There's a certain amount of adulterant that the buyer has to accept. It was approximately, it's actually 4.1 something, but we're going to just use 4%. The number is 1/24. So if I buy 100 pounds of grain and you deliver 96 pounds of grain and some schmutz to add up to 100, I have to take it. But if you deliver, if it weighs 95 and a half, and there's a 4.5 pounds of schmutz, you have to give me more grain to equal 100 pure grain. Because it's a knas, you snuck in extra schmutz. In other words, normally the schmutz is there. But you figured you're a sharp dude, you're going to throw in a handful of extra schmutz to try and make a little more profit. The Chachamim knas you and say, now you have to give the full measure. So we're saying the same thing with land. If the measurement is off by the 1/24th, you have to accept it. But if the measurement is off by slightly more than that, he has to give you additional land to make it perfect. And that's what we're saying here. Okay? Maxilo is a car. Okay. Harova bilvadhu machzir. We're only talking about the actual extra quarter kav. Ella as kol hamutar. But he would not only have to compensate you, he has to give you additional land to make up the full number. And we'll pick up from the Gemara tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Okay. Now, there is a possibility of a hurricane on Wednesday and Thursday.
What? We're getting tropical storm.
No. It's going to be a force 3 hurricane. The projection is when it gets here, it'll still be a 1.
We've had that before.
Okay. I was just gonna say that if it's impossible,
Impossible to have it.
well,
Do it by
no, but
Zoom.
several of us live in Yarmouth. I could do it in my house,
Do it by Zoom.
Yeah, but they,
or we could do it on the phone. But there probably won't be Zoom or the phones.
How the guy,
I mean, I'm very concerned.
That's on.
What?
so many years,
You know, phone lines are still in the air.
Remember-
Yeah, that's why there won't be.
about 8 or 9 years ago, we had same
Eight-
like this.
8 years ago,
Computer like this.
8 years ago, a week and a half after we moved here, the power was out for 3 days
Yeah, they had-
from
I mean,
a hurricane.
the hurricane hit 30 miles up the coast.
Right.
Start. Thank you, Rabbi Byrne.
You're welcome.
She got what's your name? Mordecai. Forgot.
That's my name. Or Michael.
Mikey.
Or anything you want up late to dinner.
Okay, cookies tomorrow.
Cookies tomorrow?
Okay.
Well, tomorrow's not a tinus
Not today.
because today was a tinus
Always.
and he didn't want to be a michshol.
Okay.
If you wanted to go dig it out on your own, fine, but he didn't want to be a michshol.
Somewhere I was on kibbutz, we had